We must unite what has been set aside.
We are TFR, Truth Frequency Radio.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Field here radio. On have your attention and to be joined by my special guest this evening, Rob Skiba. Rob, are you there, brother?
I am. How you doing, man?
Well, brother, and thank you for your willingness to join me in this evening's podcast. I look forward to our continued session of Genesis and soon get into the book of Enoch, but wanted to give you a chance, if you would, to give out your information, website, content.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my main website is robschannel.com. That's the hub that will take you to pretty much everywhere else, robschannel.com. Of course, seedtheseries.com is the project that I'm working on, and I'm also here on TFR on Wednesday evenings, 11 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Let's get an update on the Seed the Series, because I'm sure that many people are interested that you were pushing the graphic novel, which what you have shared with us already looks fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. I've had an incredible week this week, brother. I started this week with a conversation. Well, actually, Rick Hummer came down to scout out the location with John Gabrielson and Chris Pontius to go check out the venue for the Flat Earth International Conference in November, because that's pretty close to where I live. And so they were scouting the venue out. We all went out to eat that night. Had a fantastic conversation. Got to hang out with Chris Pontius on Monday and check out his studio. He's the guy that makes the Flat Earth really high quality models, rotating domes, stars, everything already in it. I mean, he does a really good job. Got to spend some time with him. Had a conversation early this week with Isaac Chavez, who he does T-shirts and hats and stuff like that, apparel, for a lot of the conferences, and we've been in discussion for a while now about him doing seed product, and so he's very excited to be the manufacturer for us for that, so that's in the works. Comic books really coming along well. We are about 4 pages away from completion, I think, and the biggest news was I had a conversation with Mornay Thuenson in South Africa on Tuesday with some special effects houses out there to start putting together a teaser trailer for Seed with the CGI, 100% CGI. I've been building models for it and stuff. That went really well, and I committed to a budget that I didn't have. It was a step of faith. I was like, okay, well, this is how much I really have, but I'll go ahead and commit to this budget. And later that day, I went to my post office box, and somebody wrote me a check for the entire budget.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's on top of what I'd already raised. So, needless to say, extremely excited, and things are in the works now that we've actually got some funds to go make some things happen. So, very excited.
Wow, that's amazing. I knew it would get to that point. I was told just pushing forward and being God would provide.
Yeah. I don't hear you. You're breaking up, man.
Oh, can you?
You're breaking up. Hello.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me check the settings again.
Okay. In the meantime,
Everything seems to be good. You can't hear me though.
I can hear you. You were just kind of popping in and out.
Well,
You sound good
so
now.
every,
I can hear
that
you.
sounds good. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
So for those that do not know, Rob and I have started a new venture. We plan to go chapter by chapter and verse by verse through the timeline of creation in the book of Genesis. And last week made it through a whole 3 verses. Exciting. But we covered so much information in those 3 verses and spoke about the possibility of there having been a prior age that led to the destruction of. And we talked about that possibility. Left off at the very end of the show with Genesis 1:3 speaking about light D, which is the reason why I read the first passages from John, talking about Yeshua as the Word and being God, beginning that all things are like. So, I wanted to just get your take on what you thought about what I had spoken about at the very end of the show, because I did say and reveal to you how I did believe that the light being called forth there was Christ, and that I talked about how the angel in that moment introduced to him Christ was given.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out. I got most of what you said. You're asking me about the last part of Genesis that we covered last week, which was verses 3 through 5, and just to pick up sort of where we left off. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So we more or less got through the first day in our talk last week. As I understood your take on it, you were saying this was when you were not saying that this was when Yeshua was created. You were not saying that. You were saying this was when He was brought forth as the agent through which creation would continue, and that it was around this time that, if I understood you right, you think that the rebellion in heaven took place. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And once we get to the first break, I'm gonna restart and
Okay.
kind of fix it.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in a car or something. It's kind of like staticky, and then you pop in and out.
Thinking maybe I should try to now and well, I'll just let you speak for the most part, and then get to
Okay.
get to the first.
Okay. One of the things I just want to say is that this is a quest for truth. Okay, so that means, we've talked about it a number of times before, that it is the mark of an intelligent mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Now, some of the things that Zen may say and some of the things that I may say, that these are our opinions. These are the beliefs that we've come to as a result of our studies. We're not telling anybody else what to believe. We're just having an open dialogue here about what we believe. There may be times where we will have disagreement, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show with Zen is because I know from times past that even in our disagreement we can still remain friends and brothers and cordial. So I thrive in that environment where I can bounce ideas off of somebody, even if we disagree, and even if we have other ideas and things that I've never considered. Because so many times we have a frame of mind, a thought process, a way of believing something that we were stuck in for however long, and then somebody else comes along with a different perspective we never considered before, and now you have something new to think about. So, for the people that are in the chat room that want to fight and argue about some of the things we talked about before, like the pre-Adamic civilization, the possibility of a so-called gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, look, that doesn't affect anything in eternity, ultimately. It's a non-essential discussion. It's just something that's interesting to look at. And what I maintain, just by way of review from last week, is that we know at the end, after the tribulation period, the millennial reign, all that stuff, there's a point coming where we're going to get a reset button. And it says that God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth. So this place is getting a rework, a reset. And so I'm of the opinion that if we know we're going to get a reset, I have no problem believing that we could be in a reset. And I see no reason why that, if that's the case, why that couldn't fit between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2.
Absolutely. And I would hope that people would open themselves to new, that really none of us knows everything, and we don't all have the answers. So that's why we're doing. But
well, something else I just want to say. Somebody in the chat room said that gap theory always leads to old Earth. No, I don't believe so. I know that there are probably some people within. There's different flavors of every theory, I suppose. There may be some who are of the day-age theory, the gap theory, and those are people who like to give credence to the millions and billions of years. From my side of it, I see this. The creation that we are currently living in, thereby anything that we could date, whether historically or even radiometrically or otherwise, would be reflective of the reset. So, in my mind, it wouldn't lead to old Earth. The Earth that we could test right now would only be within the biblical time frame of this current reset. So, but the other thought that I had, actually, Zen, as a result of our discussion last week, was I've always just sort of written off the Sumerian writings as counterfeit and probably fallen angel inspired and whatnot, seeds planted for deception, which I still think is very likely. However, if there was a pre-Adamic civilization, perhaps run by angels, maybe, or beings that we now call angels, then maybe there may be some truth to because in the King's List, even the ages that they give for some of the characters in the Sumerian King's List exceed Methuselah. Methuselah's 969 years of age, and we got people in the Sumerian King's List that live well beyond that. So, yeah. So, could it be then that is reflective of the angels are telling whoever wrote those texts, that they are the principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places that were ruling over the area of Samaria at that given time in history, and they were sharing their perspective with the people that they were governing over that had given allegiance to them. And so I'm just thinking out loud here. This is completely off the cuff, totally just thinking out loud here. If that's the case, then the Sumerian King's List could make sense to me, literally, as possibly being true from the perspective of the angels in the gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly my take on it. And speaking about the prior times, what the Egyptians called Sept, and that it would make sense, the King's List, long dates, the long reigns, and what Rosas and Matthew spoke about, and Hesiod and Work of Days speaking about that golden age, and even the Emerald Tablets of Thoth.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, you want to jump into day 2. If you'd like, I can go ahead and just read the entire day, the narrative.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll do that. Picking up in verse 6. Certainly a lot to talk about here. I have a feeling we're probably not going to get out of day 2 for this broadcast. But, okay. And this is what I got stuck. I got to be honest with you. And, people who may not yet be on the Biblical Cosmology page yet, all I'm going to say to you is I dare you to pray this prayer. Father, if I'm bringing preconceived biases to the text, please remove it from me and allow your Holy Spirit to teach me what the text is saying. That's the prayer that I prayed back in 2015. And, well, you don't get much further than verse 6, which I'm just about to start with, when you get nailed with something called the firmament. And make no mistake about it, I'm sure we're going to cover more of it throughout this broadcast, that thing is a hard, solid structure. And there's no way you can get away with saying it's just the expanse of air, gas, and the vacuum of space. Okay, so with that said, I'll go ahead and read verse 6. And God said, let there be a, singular, firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And the reason I was stressing and the is because it is singular. You got people like Kent Hovind, God bless him, I love the guy, I appreciate all the stuff that he's done in combating the lies of the textbooks and evolution, but he stopped short. I mean, his focus was primarily on geological and biological evolution, and he, for whatever reason, I mean, you can just go through his YouTube channel. Dude has, I don't know, hundreds probably, maybe even thousands of videos about the lies in the textbooks, dealing with the lies of geology, the lies of archaeology, the lies of biology, picanology, except for cosmology. He's given it 100% pass, And Ken Ham, same thing. I watched an outstanding video by Ken Ham yesterday from Answers in Genesis regarding just destroying evolution. And I'm like, these guys will say we need to take a stand on Scripture and that the Bible is true and we can trust it as our literal source for truth and it is scientifically accurate. And they'll say all that for everything about biology, and other things. But when it gets to cosmology, nope, it's allegorical, figures of speech, poetic, metaphor. And that's what's gotten really frustrating to me. And you had Kent Hovind, who had a theory that I myself used to teach and preach, using his materials largely and those of Dr. Carl Baugh, of the so-called Canopy Theory, that in that model, the Earth was surrounded by a canopy of probably some kind of crystalline ice or something. And even as recent as December 2014, I did a teaching on this, that in that mindset, the flood was caused maybe by like a comet or something hitting the earth. Now, that right away is a violation of what the Scripture says, because Scripture says the fountains of the great deep were broken up first, and then the windows of heaven were opened. That whole theory required something to penetrate the canopy and impact the earth. Okay, and then the other problem you have with that is it says that the sun, moon, and stars are in the firmament. We'll get to that on day 4. Not the in their model, the sun, moon, and stars are outside of the firmament. And so, I mean, that was huge for me, because I can't tell you how many times throughout the last 30 plus 40 years that I have taught that without ever seeing it, because I was bringing my own preconceived biases to the text, and so was Kent, and he recognized that the psalmist, probably David, talks about, I think it's Psalm 148, don't quote me on that, I'm not sure if that's the right address, but I think it is, that there's waters that be above the heavens, that the waters are still there. So, recognizing that, Kent says, well, there must be another crystalline firmament on the outside of the infinite universe, or, nearly infinite, or ever expanding, whatever you want to say, vastly huge star galaxy filled, billions and billions Carl Sagan universe, that there's another crystalline firmament out there. And then you have other people that said, well, we know there's 3 heavens. Paul's caught up to the 3rd heaven, so we hear all this stuff about 3 heavens. We see here that he called the firmament heaven. So there's three firmaments. I'm going, no, there's a firmament, the firmament. Have you dealt with all that kind of stuff too?
Oh yes, absolutely. And again, with the before, when I didn't understand biblical cosmology and trying to filter it through what I had as preconceived bias, understanding the heliocentric worldview, I didn't even recognize, and neither had I ever really examined what the firmament was in greater context. But in doing so, looking at the word rakia and how it implies that it was hammered and it's a solid structure, it was put in place by the Most High God to separate the waters above from the waters below. All of that forced me to reconsider. And like you, it most certainly was a trigger for me to understand biblical cosmology and to make sense of it in the way that I do now. So yeah, it was one of those things that really helped me to come around and force me to have a paradigm shift.
Yeah, massively huge. So, what do we got? 5 minutes or so before the break?
5 minutes.
The Hebrew word is rakia, and it comes from, in other words, raka, that means to beat out, to pound, like to pound the ground, or to pound out layers of metal, for like the laver in the temple. And what I say, I'm like, look, how do you pound out air? How do you pound out gas, the vacuum of space? If you think the firmament is just the expanse, and that's the buzzword that even shockingly enough, the King James only crowd wants to latch onto. I'm like, you can't do that. If you're King James only, you don't have that luxury. You can't do that. You have to stick with firmament. And firmament comes from the Latin firmamentum, which comes from the Greek stereoma, which comes from the Hebrew rakia. So that's what, I got a friend of mine, and one of these days we're going to do a show together. People have heard me talk about him for a number of years now. My friend Peter, who grew up in Greece and speaks Greek fluently, he's been looking through the scriptures from a Greek perspective and, looking at the language and going, wow, the translators have taken a lot of liberties over the years, in his opinion, with the Greek language. But he's the guy he's my go-to guy with anything Greek, and I love it because I never tell him why I'm asking the question. So he has no dog in the hunt. And so just out of the blue, I'll call him up, and one day I asked him the question. I said, dude, what is the word stereoma? And he immediately he proceeded to describe a solid base, a structure, everything he used was in reference to something hard, firm, strong, a base, And I said, so there's no way you could use that word to mean like air, gas, or the vacuum of space. He goes, no, absolutely not. Why? I said, well, because that's the Greek word that the Hebrew scholars chose when they took their Hebrew word rakia, from which we later get the word firmament, and they translated it into Greek as stereoma. So what is that saying to you? He's like, well, that thing's got to be hard then. I'm like, yep, sure does. So, I mean, and that's a frustrating thing to me with these Bible scholars, and that's in quotes now, is like they just refuse to see it. And then you have others who do recognize it and who are intellectually honest with the text, like Dr. Michael Heiser. He totally gets it, but then he rejects it. Like he'll build a massively awesome case from the ancient Near Eastern perspective, and he knows many different ancient Near Eastern languages. He's a Semitic language expert, knows Hebrew, all that stuff, and he makes a very articulate case for the fact that the Hebrews shared the same cosmological worldview as their neighbors, and that was of a circular enclosed world model set on pillars under a dome, within which the sun, moon, and stars were placed. But then at the end of it, he'll turn around and deny it and say, well, that's because they didn't have a scientific worldview, and now we do. And when I hear that now, I'm reminded of what Paul warned Timothy about science falsely so-called, which some believing that falsely so-called science have erred concerning the faith. And I just saw a video today that, again, I love the guy. He's a friend of mine. Lex Meyer put out a video, and he was talking about the truther movement in general. But in that discussion, he was talking about people who are making a big deal of the shape of the Earth and saying it's all a distraction. We need to get back to the Word of God. And I'm like going, hello, we are. We're talking about the Word of God, the very thing you guys are not taking seriously. You're telling everybody we need to get back to the Word of God, trust it, believe what it says, walk in it, and yet here we are trying to do exactly that, and the vast majority of our brothers are ridiculing, mocking, and slandering us because of it. And I'm taking a stand against it now. I mean, I'm not backing down with these people. I'm like, look, it says what it says. You guys are the ones that aren't believing what it says. And if God can't, the Creator can't get the front of His book right, why should I believe Him for the rest of the book? That's the importance here, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you on that. And again, when you're honest and you look at the Greek and the Hebrew and the original context of the meanings of the words, it's undeniable unless you just, are hard pressed against and unwilling to bend and simply will deny. And but if you are open minded and you're willing to allow the text to stand for itself, well, then you have to really accept something of what we.
Yeah, now, right around the time that I was really diving into...
From the dawn of man, we have turned to nature to help attain balance within ourselves. But somewhere, we lost our way. Western culture is once again remembering the healing benefits of CBD, the non-psychoactive component of the hemp plant. That's why more and more people who use CBD report relief from inflammation and chronic pain, balanced blood sugar and cardiovascular system, relief from muscle tensions, tremors, migraines, headaches, anxiety, depression, and the list goes on. The big question is, where do you get it? IALife is a 99% pure CBD oil made with all organic ingredients, and it's available to TFR listeners worldwide. If you use coupon code TFR at checkout, you'll get $5 towards your order. Head on over to ialife.com now. That's AYA life.com.
Increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result, a safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones, please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
Once in a decade, a true story comes along that remembers the future. After 6 Amazon bestsellers, I have completed the epic Birth Trilogy, a true story of Earth. By reading the Birth Trilogy, you will journey with the characters from the origin of Earth to its final destiny in a white-knuckle ride that combines the intrigue of Tom Clancy with the epic scope of Prometheus and Interstellar. You will learn more about the purpose of life, the mystery of death, and the true nature of your soul than you thought possible. The Birth Trilogy is now available on Amazon and Kindle. The audio version is a free bonus when you buy the paperback, so even if you're not a great reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you. Use the Amazon app today and buy the Birth Trilogy, spelled B-E-A-R-T-H, or search for my name. I'm Brooks Agnew.
No fear. TFR, your protection from deception.
And in those days, there were giants in the land, and the sons of the angels of God looked upon the daughters of men and found them fair, and took of them wives, and their sons became of old great men of renown. So they have been mixing with us on a genetic level since the time of Enoch and Ezekiel's will.
Here on Earth we're intrigued by the sun, moon, and stars, and imagine there's got to be planets like ours. So conceive of a face on the surface of Mars, so in need of a meaning and purpose we lost. And indeed they believe that these might be our gods, or that maybe with time we'll do right and evolve, and eventually reach what they seek, and then solve all the problems of man. But they really don't know that they fall, and the works of our hands are but just filthy rags. So we travel the lands to dig up our past time, our lapses, and with it much of the facts. Some imagine that gods came in alien class and reacted this way. They're so desperate.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everything is better, and that whatever technical difficulties we had previously will have been cleared up. And how do I sound to you, brother?
Oh, you sound 100% better.
Thank God. Praise
better.
God.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good. I wanted to share something with you about, since we're talking about day 2, and I think it's a critical topic that we should spend some time on with regard to the firmament, because it is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to biblical cosmology. And as we were speaking about previously, when you really open yourself to the possibility of what the text is describing as this solid structure, and that the firmament was placed, fixed to the circle of the earth that was inscribed upon the waters of the deep, that there are other passages also that speak of it coming down and being fastened to the earth, as we see being implied in Amos 9:6, talking about how the vaulted dome of the earth is fixed to the heavens, and that it breaches that gap between the heavens and the earth. But anyways, there's a passage here in what's called the Perk de Rabbi Eleazar that speaks about this second day creation of the firmament, and it says, "The hooks of the heavens are fixed in the waters of the ocean. The waters of the ocean are situated between the ends of the heavens and the ends of the earth. The ends of the heavens are spread out over the waters of the ocean, as it is said, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters. The dome or inside shape of the heavens ascends upwards like a tub, that is to say, like a tent, which is spread out with its extremities fixed downwards, and its dome stretching upwards, so that people can sit beneath it, and their feet stand on the earth, whilst all of them are inside the tent. And likewise are the heavens, their extremities are fixed downwards, and their dome stretches upwards, and all creatures dwell beneath them, as in a tent, as it is said, and he spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in." Which, you and I are familiar with the Isaiah 40:22 passage, because he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, again, in my opinion, that's speaking about the rakia, the firmament, because now, having studied this information, I know without a doubt that the Most High God is seated upon the vaulted dome of the earth, and what John describes as a sea of glass like unto crystal. All of these things make a lot more sense when you examine them with this idea again of the firmament being this solid structure placed upon and fitted to the circle of the earth. And so what did you think about this passage? I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, man, I was biting my tongue not to interrupt you, but wow, man, who was that? What was that reference?
It's from a book called The Perk, which I believe it means book, Pirke, de Rabbi, de Rabbi Rabbi Eleazar. It's a book of commentary, much like the Chronicles of Jeremiah, which is one of the texts that I included when I did the parallel study on the first 4 days of the creation week. I took all of the references to the creation from the Book of Jubilees, Jasher, even the Chronicles of Jeremiah, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, just different texts, and put them together with the King James, the Targum, and provided all of what they said to give people a better understanding of the creation week. And this is one that I studied after, but it is also a book of ancient commentary, and it dates very back in the ancient traditions. And I found especially this quote intriguing, especially since it speaks about the dome.
Oh yeah, I mean, talk about point blank. I mean,
right.
That is an incredible text.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really cool. This is something else. Is kind of a pet peeve of mine. Is these people who want to say that it's poetic language.
Right.
I'm like, look, roses are red, violets are blue. You just heard poetry, yet it's still true. Okay, get it? Just because it may have some, and I would contest that it's not poetic language, but even if it was, it doesn't negate truth. Are you going to say that the Psalms are irrelevant? That the Psalms aren't true because it's poetic language? I mean,
right.
How far do we take this, right? And when you say figures of speech, or they're using a simile, like as a tent, if we're talking of metaphors, I'm like, well, yeah, a simile is similar. A metaphor should convey in the mind of the listener or the reader something at least remotely close to resembling whatever it is that you're trying to discuss. So when the author, Isaiah in this case, wrote that the heaven is like or as a tent, well, anybody who heard that thought of a structure set up over a flat surface.
Right.
Nobody thought of a spinning ball hurling around another ball at 666,000 miles per hour, or whatever, 67, whatever it is, 67, whatever the number is, around a sun that itself is going 500,000 miles through an hour through the galaxy,
Right.
Complete nonsense. And I started to say right before the break that, as I was just diving into all this stuff, and many people have heard me talk about this. There's numerous times where I'm throwing the towel. That's it. I'm done. Forget it. I can't go any further. This guy, Andy Hoy, contacts me out of the blue and sends me this pretty thick package in the mail, and it was like a 9x11 or 9x12 envelope, with a bunch of stuff in it. And, look, I'm busy. I get a lot of emails. Something that comes in that's more than a page or, a card. It goes in the, okay, I'll get to it later pile, which I unfortunately almost never get to. So it ended up going in that pile. I'm like, oh, geez, this guy just sent me like... But it was a mutual friend, somebody that knew him and myself, that said, hey, Zen, did you get a package from a guy named Andy Hoy? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound familiar. And he kind of explained it to me a little bit more. I said, yeah, actually, I think I might have got something like that. He's like, dude, you need to go home, find it, read it. I'm like, okay. So I finally did, and when I opened it up and I see this 6-story high dome tent that Andy, who is a structural engineer, not a flat earther, at least not at the time. You'll have to ask him where he is now. But at the time when he did this thing, he was simply a Hebrew scholar who was an engineer who was in Israel. He was in Israel studying the tabernacle in the wilderness and studying biblical Hebrew. And he's looking at the text. Now, the Torah specifically says you cannot add to it and you cannot subtract from it. Like, that comes with a heavy penalty. It's a severe warning. And so Andy's looking at the descriptions given for the tabernacle, and Bezalel, who's the guy with, I think the other guy was a Holiab or something like that. These guys were charged with making the thing. And so he's reading the descriptions, and then he goes to look at you can find these models in various places throughout Israel, whether in museums or in some cases actually physical structures set up in the wilderness for examples, for people to check out. He says you always see this, long rectangular box with multiple layers of fabric laid on top of it, which actually makes no sense at all. Structurally, it's the least structurally sound thing you could build, a box like that. And with all those layers on top of each other, if it got wet, if it rained, you would have all kinds of issues with mold. And the Torah is very specific about, getting the mold out, And he's like, and plus the rough edges of the square box itself that these things are on, if it's windy, I mean, it's just, everything he was looking at is like, this is the most ridiculous structure ever, And, but then what caught his eye was he was seeing that, wait a minute, because it is not a structurally sound thing, people had to add extra poles and rope and tent pegs and things outside of the itemized shopping list that God himself gave to Moses to give to Bezalel and his buddy. And so now Andy's going, wait a minute, we can't add to, we can't subtract from, and I'm seeing a whole lot of additions right here. And so he's like, what? And it really caused a problem for him, There was some major disconnect for him. So he starts looking at the text again, and there's a lot of textual real estate given to the description of the curtains. And, he's looking at so the curtains are clearly important because there's a lot of description here. And it says connect the curtains at the ends. But it doesn't specify which end. And these are long rectangular strips, so everybody assumes, keyword, assumes that you're connecting it at the long end. And when you do, you basically end up with a rectangular box. It's about the only thing that works. But the text doesn't demand that you connect it that way. It just says connect them at the end. So he's like, well, what if I connect them at the short ends? And when he did that, he ended up with a big circle as an outline, like a big circus tent, like a huge, dome-shaped circus tent. And now there's no more fabric overlaid on top of each other in a ridiculous fashion. Fabric's all being used to cover this huge dome thing. And when you think of the creator of the cosmos creating something that's going to represent his house, so to speak, here on Earth with his people, that little rectangular box is simply not that impressive. And I'm going to, here on YouTube, and I'm going to put up a screen share here. Everybody listening on the radio, you could go to project314.org. Project314.org is Andy's website. Right on the landing, on the homepage there, you'll see the typical layout of this rectangular box, in the wilderness. And if you scroll down, he's got this heading, but what if? And then just using the Hebrew text, not adding or subtracting anything from it, simply connecting the things slightly different than what the typical reconstruction of the tabernacle does, you end up with a 6-story high circular dome tent. And when he told me 6 stories high, at that time I had an office building where I had my seat office, and I had a parking garage that was 6 stories high. And so every day when I pulled into the parking garage, I'm looking at the height of that thing. And I did a bunch of tests up there, when I was looking into the moon and the eclipses and all kinds of stuff. I was regularly on that roof. And I looked down from the top of that roof. I'm going, that would have been an impressive sight.
Right.
To any of the, that thing would have been swallowed up and nobody would have seen it. When the Israelites were encamped around it, you'd see this sea of tents and maybe this little rectangular box peeking up over some of the top of the tents, depending on the angle you were looking at. But there would be no mistaking this thing. If this was in the center of the Hebrew camps, a 6-story high circular dome tent, somewhat translucent, looking like a glowing red eyeball in the middle of the desert, that would have been an impressive sight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I think that the Most High, having established the cosmology, that, Andy's work really, it added to what all of us were being led in discovery. Mm-hmm. Well, those of us like myself and yourself that opened ourselves to new possibility and really examined the text with open mind, and with trying to put away our indoctrination and our preconceived notions. And for a lot of people, that's the most difficult thing for them to do, is to overcome their own bias and their own indoctrination, and to really examine the text with new light and new possibility. And so that's the hardest thing. But I think Andy's work, and just for the listening audience, I recently spoke with Andy, and he's going to be coming on with us soon as well. And he's since written a book about and shared beautiful illustrations and really well done. So people should definitely check out his book, and I believe he's got some posters and illustrations as well. But yeah, his work was another one of those confirming witnesses in my mind as to what God was leading many of us to new discovery and to new revelation upon. And and now we know this to be truth. And the simple thing of that, curvature is non-existent, that forces everybody to reconsider once you just learn that one simple fact. And the whole journey that you did in Chicago and confirming that, that was not a mirage, you and Rick Hummer, I mean, these kind of things, they add up, and it's just too much. And then myself being one that has looked at and examined many ancient manuscripts, many of which most people have never heard about, and even individuals like Flavius Josephus, he said this, the creation on the second day. After this, on the second day, he placed the heaven over the whole world, which in my mind is the dome that was just spoken about in the previous quote, and separated it from the other parts, and he determined it should stand by itself. He also placed a crystalline firmament round it and put it together in a manner agreeable to the earth, and fitted it for giving moisture and rain, and for affording the advantage of dews. And so, even Flavius Josephus, being an ancient historian, speaking about and understanding and knowing the Hebrew scriptures, he describes the same thing that we are all now trying to bring forth to those who would listen, which that still remains to be a small crowd, and most still are vehemently opposed to this information. And I know you receive a lot of criticism, as I do, on this topic, and a lot of people, like a lot of my listeners that listen to and hear the message of everything else that I talk about, but when I go into biblical cosmology, some of them will just, immediately shut it off. They won't even, they don't want to hear it, don't want to learn anything about it, and don't want to be informed in any manner as to this revelation. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree completely. And for me, the timing, when you walk with God long enough, you start to realize that He speaks to each of us in ways that we can receive it, ways that we can discern that this is Him talking, And
right.
So the way He communicates with me is probably different from the way He communicates with you and others. For me, like, I need confirmation. Like, I'm a big lay the fleece out kind of guy, because I doubt a lot, and I'm always too in my head thinking about things and overthinking things, and brother, so is it me? Is it am I making this up, or is this really God? God, if it's you, please confirm it. And stuff like that. So He knows, maybe I'm a needy child, I guess you might say, but He knows that He needs to communicate certain ways with me, for me to be able to move on and to receive it, And so when I was going through that sort of spiritual mental crucible, trying to figure all this stuff out, and what does it all mean, and I can't keep going on like this, and yada yada yada. The timing of when I received that package from Andy Hoy,
right,
is not a coincidence. In fact, I was when I was doing a lot of theater, there was a roadie that was helping me load some trucks up one day, and the word coincidence came up in the conversation. He said, my mother always told me that coincidence is just God being anonymous. And I thought, like, dude, I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life.
I like that.
That's a brilliant statement. But yes, it's not a coincidence. This was like my uncle. There was a book called God Winks, and it's these serendipitous moments that where God just does something, that that it's not a coincidence that he did it. And
supernatural, absolutely.
It's supernatural. It's touched by an angel kind of episode kind of thing.
Right.
And my uncle, he's passed away since, but he had your typical classic Texas Southern drawl, and he's like, now that's a God wink right there. That's a God wink. That was truly a God wink for me. The timing of when I received Andy's deal, and it was right after I had created the 3D model that people have probably seen by now in my presentations and on my Testing the Globe website. When I created the Yahuwah terrarium, I created that model in pieces from the inside out. So in fact, for the YouTube audience, I started using a 3D printer to make the thing. I've got this is a modular piece that has a base and has the circle of the Earth that goes into the base, and then a dome that goes on top of it. I got cutouts in the base for the pillars, and then the dome goes on top of it, and then the footstool of the Lord then is covered with water inside a larger box structure. And if you've seen the picture that I've done out there, so I had literally just created the 3D rendering of this thing that I later printed with a 3D printer when I got the package from Andy that almost just so happened to look exactly like what I just created,
Awesome.
And
yeah.
so that was part of what got Andy to contact me, because he had realized that one of the reasons is Project 314, that's pi, right? So he had realized that the dimensions had a relationship to pi. So he's like, oh cool, in his mind is this confirms the globe. So he starts going online to look for copyright-free imagery of the globe that he could use in his materials. And so he starts doing some searches, and like any of us who starts doing that, you start seeing words like image, composite, CGI, stuff that's telling you what you're looking at. It's not real. It's not the real deal. And apparently, and I guess as I understand the story, in the Google search, my model was there as an image too. And he's like, "What is that?" He looks at it. He starts reading what I'm saying about his footstool, and at first he's like, "What is this?" And then he's looking at what I did, and he looks over at what he did, and he's like, "What?" So it's kind of a God wink for him too. The timing of when he was working on that project, and when I was getting to where I was with my research on it, on all of this. So he has since become a dear brother to me. He's a really good guy, a good friend. And an encourager, somebody who's called me on a number of times to give me a pep talk, help me along the way. But I think he's got a powerful revelation. And look, he's getting hit all over the place too, because there is that mindset that no, the tabernacle in the wilderness is the rectangular box. That's the so he's. But I mean, as a structural engineer, as a biblical Hebrew scholar, he's got a rock-solid case. And I would just say to people who may be listening to this or watching us on YouTube right now, spend some time on this website. Go to project314.org, and I'm trying to think of what page it was. Yeah, he's got a whole bunch of stuff on Pi. There's a tab called Design, and then a drop-down menu, and the drop-down under Design is outside the box. And read, his thought process there as he's going through it and as he's putting the thing together. And when I just started looking at it, I'm like, man, this guy makes a lot of sense. Now does that mean Solomon's temple was also a big dome? He hasn't said yes or no, not that I'm aware of. I think he's trying to build a case maybe at the moment for what he's before he comes out on it, what he really thinks, but. I wouldn't be surprised, because we always read that after the Babylonian captivity, when they came back into the land, Ezra, Nehemiah, and those guys, they want to rebuild the temple, right? And they did. They built the second temple, but when everybody saw it, they wept because it wasn't the grandeur of the first temple.
Yes.
Right? Now we read that and we think, oh, it just wasn't as fancy. Solomon had more gold and flair to it. Well, maybe that's true, or maybe it was an entirely different structure. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, this gets people like Rico Cortez all riled up because the temple is like that's his wheelhouse. That's his whole ministry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's a temple guy. That's like his entire ministry. So he is very offended by Andy's model. Does not
Oh my goodness.
I don't know that he's been hostile about it or anything like that, but he definitely doesn't agree with it. That much is for sure.
Well, just really quickly before we go to break, it's my opinion that, the second temple could no way relate or resemble the first, because Solomon utilized demons and fallen angels and having control. There was not even an iron tool used in the construction of that temple, but he had supernatural forces building and working on, like if you read the Testament of Solomon, and so the building by men and hands and tools could in no way equal the grandeur of the first temple. So and so just my opinion on that. But yeah, we'll be right back, everyone, for a second hour. We do appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us and listen to us. We are going through the Genesis timeline and the narrative of the creation week. We'll be right back. My guest is Rob Skiba.
Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm 10 years old. I'm one of the millions of children born to parents suffering from the sheeple virus. Symptoms include the inability to think for oneself, the attention span of a goldfish, and a strong belief in government and the mainstream media. It is estimated that 1 out of every 2 children are being raised by parents infected with the sheeple virus. But there is a cure. For as little as 19 cents per day, you can become a TFR supporter and help children like me get their daily dose of truth. Together, we will make sure every child has protection from deception.
Complaint blocked civilian casualties. I'm Barbara Cusack. A whistleblower complaint has set off a struggle between Congress and the executive branch. Congresswoman Jackie Speer weighs in as the government's intelligence watchdog declined to discuss the substance of the complaint that reportedly concerned President Trump making a promise to a foreign leader.
The Director of National Intelligence is supposed to, shall is the word, shall transfer that information to the House and Senate intelligence committees, none of which took place.
The Washington Post now reports that its sources say the matter concerns Ukraine. Amid tensions over strikes on Saudi oil installations, Iran says its president and foreign minister have received visas from the United States to attend next week's UN General Assembly meeting in New York. The foreign minister is set to arrive Friday and President Rouhani on Monday. Over a dozen civilians were killed in a drone strike in eastern Afghanistan linked to U.S. forces. Correspondent Barbara Starr reports questions have been raised as to whether the Islamic State fighters targeted were taken out.
16 killed, 8 wounded, and what they simply don't know at this point is they were targeting ISIS, but is that who was killed? That's the point of the investigation. They're going to have to talk to local people out there, local leaders, and try and determine exactly what did happen.
As the number of vaping-related illnesses has risen, correspondent Joe Ramsey reports the Food and Drug Administration disclosed that its Office of Criminal Investigations is pursuing a probe into the supply chain.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says confirmed and probable cases have been reported in 38 states and 1 territory. The total number of vaping illnesses is now 530, up from 380 a week ago. 7 deaths have been reported. 3/4 of the cases are male and 2/3 are between the ages of 18 and 34, first appearing in April.
Making for dangerous flooding in parts of Texas, the National Weather Service says Imelda is the 7th wettest tropical cyclone in the 48 contiguous states.
Wherever you are, make it TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
And on the second day, God made the lower heaven and called it Rakia. That is to say, what is solid and fixed, or firmament. This he did that he might make known that the lower heaven doth not possess the nature of the heaven which is above it, and that it is different in appearance from that heaven which is above it. For the heaven above it is of fire. This is from the Cave of Treasures, and it's another one of those examples when you look at some of these parallel stories on the creation account, that again the rakia is solid and fixed, and even the word for firmament, firm, rigid, hard, all of those adjectives describe what we are speaking about with regard to the firmament. And we were talking about synchronicity and revelation and confirming witness, and so I wanted to, if you don't mind, to get you to share the story of when you were talking with Rick Hummer, and he had mentioned and brought forth his information about some of his school notes. I believe it was from 6th grade, or because this was what I witnessed and how that was all captured in video. That was, in my mind, another confirming witness to all of us that are studying and opening ourselves to the possibility of God, really, that you guys are on the right path.
Yeah, sure. People are saying your microphone's low again. You're not quite as... I could still hear you, but your level was really low, and it's starting to sound kind of fuzzy like it was before. You weren't cutting in and out, but just so whatever... If you're able to fix it, you might, just so you're aware of it. In the meantime, well, I was going through one of many difficult days back, in 2015, dealing with this whole research and the flack and people going psycho on me every day and losing support and just all the trouble that we were having at that time. And so Rick was trying to encourage me, and I'm like, dude, I just gotta go, man. I'm out of here. Save it. Bye. So I hung up on him, and he was just so frustrated. He's like, oh man, he was bummed out, that his friend he couldn't do anything to help his friend. So, right after he got off the phone with me, he looked outside and saw a box that he had gotten from, I think it was grandmother's attic or something. And the reason he had pulled that box down is because he knew there were some action figures in it that he was going to give to his daughter to play with. And so he's like, okay, well, I'll go out there and open it up. And anyway, he opens the box up, and right on top of the box was a folder from one of his courses in high school. And he opens it up, and it was I think it was a geography lesson or something. And he's like, what? First of all, what's this even doing in here? And this is the page I turned to. And so he gets the phone out just to tell me of the serendipity of that. That he was like, dude, he was sending me a message like, dude, we just got off the phone. The first thing I see here, and the first question on the page that he turned to said, what were early ideas of the shape of the earth? And so he had just read it to himself, got his phone out to retell the story to me about what had just happened with him. And he gets to the page, and when he says, look at this, he's like, and it says, what was the early thoughts on the shape of the earth or whatever, and he had written in his pen or pencil or whatever, it was flat. And the moment he said that, there was a loud clap of thunder and lightning, and it was a clear day, as I understand it. And it freaked him out, and his daughter was actually sitting right next to him, and she's like, lightning! And you can hear her, you can even hear her, on the phone. And so, for him, because he had been praying too, he was new to all this. I had just introduced him to the topic, and he was like, what's the deal, Father? If this is real, show me. And so he took that as a sign that this was the God wink for him. And I heard his story, and it was certainly intriguing, but that happened to him. It didn't happen to me. I was gonna have to go on a longer journey, unfortunately.
Right. Well, I'm hoping the mic is better. I'm not sure what
it's better
keeps happening. Okay, good. Thank God. All right, but the reason I had you bring up that particular story is because I also had previous in my lifetime that same experience happened to me, and it was on a day where it was absolutely clear, sunny. I was in deliberation, and I was basically not asking God for a sign, but deliberating in similar manner just over my experience and my belief in God. And that happened to me, and without a doubt, I knew immediately that was the Most High. Mm-hmm. And so that particular experience that happened there to Rick, and that was caught on video, took me back and reminded me of that experience that had happened to me previously as well. And I know that God speaks through the creation in such manner that he has the power to use lightning and the wind, the voice of many waters, that he speaks through his creation as well. And that is one of the ways that he has communicated with me, is through nature and through the creation. That particular experience was very deeply profound for me, as it was rattling for Rick and his daughter, and I think a lot of people that have watched and seen and how all that unfolded. I mean, in my opinion, it's undeniable that that there was something divine and supernatural to that whole occurrence. And for anybody that, again, has experienced that in similarity, I mean, without a doubt, sends chills up my spine.
Well, that's the thing, man. Like, I never had any of these types of multiple confirming witness type experiences when I was talking about the cosmos and trying to make the Bible fit the model that we've all been taught. It wasn't until I started I finally prayed and said, okay, Father, you show me what the text is saying. I mean, and this is an intentional prayer, because we all, whether we know it or not, are bringing preconceived bias to the text. We all have it, and so, I mean, for me, I was very much aware of it and was very fervent in my prayer. Please, just Father, get me out of the way so I can hear your Holy Spirit show me what this text is saying,
Right.
When I did that, I mean, these are all the crazy. I mean, yes, 2015, 16 were difficult years, man. They were rough. But
oh, no doubt.
During that time, I had lots of those things. I mean, Rick had that lightning thing. I had the Andy Hoy thing and other things. Just lots of different things. People coming along out of nowhere with encouragement or even a check to take us into the next month. When a way was made where we didn't feel like there was any way. Booking that trip to go across Lake Michigan when we did. It took over a year to get that trip together, to get the funds for it, to get our schedules lined up for it, and to get a boat captain to do it. And even the day that we did it, Rick had, as I understand it, he had another guy lined up, and at the last minute, the guy had already pulled out, and about the time that I'm landing the airplane, I'm in the airplane, and, I'd already spent all this money to fly up there and, take the time off and hotel and rental car and all that stuff, and we don't have a boat. So, like, Rick, one of these days I might get around to finishing the full story. It's like over an hour long video that I started a long time ago, never finished it, but because we interviewed people and there are lots of things that happened. But the guy that we did get, that was a very last minute thing. He turned out to be super cool. But the real thing was, we pulled out of the dock like 47 miles away, looked out, even without the Nikon Coolpix P900, looked out across, and there's Chicago, like boom, right there. I didn't even need my camera to see it. And Tony, the boat captain, is like, man, this never happens. Like, we had a clear sight of the city from the moment we pulled out of the dock until we got to within 5 or 10 miles from it, and decided to turn around because he had to get back for other things, but and we had accomplished everything we needed to. So just lots of I could take all night. That's going to take us off topic, but all night, just sharing these things. So this said, and while all that was happening, while I'm having all these God winks, I'm having these just crazy responses from people that, like, just sweet, loving, otherwise very laid back people were going bat crap crazy, insane,
right.
Like psychotically insane in front of me, just at the thought of me looking into this, and I'm like, whoa, what is happening? That's what led me to early on believe that, okay, there is a spiritual stronghold here that the enemy doesn't like being exposed. Because it manifests like you wouldn't believe. And then there's other times where, I was just doing simple tests and coming up with, in my mind, profound revelation from these simple tests that anybody could do with, like, $10 worth of arts and crafts from Walmart, that explain things on a flat plane just as easily and with their science. You got the weatherman going to an optics professor to see if he was correct in saying that what you're seeing here is a mirage with the Chicago skyline, and the optics professor said, well, technically, no, it's more looming. And then they go to explain looming, and in the process of doing that, they say, the atmosphere is acting like a lens. Well, why is that? Because the atmosphere is full of moisture. And when you got zillions of convex balls of water that make up the atmosphere, when you combine them together, what do you think you get? You get a huge convex lens, which is a magnifying glass. And so once I realized that, you get the magnifying sheet out, start doing some tests. I'm like, what? And then I go on Stellarium, which is spinning heliocentric globe-based software, trying to figure out how the 24-hour sun works in Antarctica, and inadvertently end up seeing how the sun and move over the sun and moon move over the flat Earth from their model,
Right.
And I'm like, well, how do they explain how the sun speeds up and slows down? This is spinning heliocentric globe-based software is showing the sun speeding up and slowing down at the exact time that it should speed up and slow down if it's moving over the circle of the Earth and contracting and expanding its circuit. I don't know how they explained it on the globe model, but it certainly made a lot of sense to me on the circle model. So I was like, okay, Father, this is amazing. And to one of your early points that you made, just I think right before the break, you were talking about King Solomon's temple being built by Nephilim. And that was a huge revelation for me also. I had come to the same conclusion a number of years ago, back in 2011. People go to BabylonRisingBlog.com as that website represents an entire year of blogging. That was just like 2011 was just brain dump every day. And if you scroll down the left-hand menu, you see a link called Concerned with Saturn. And the CERN is capped in the concern because it deals with the CERN Hadron Collider. Well, if you click on that page and you get about halfway, three-quarters of the way down, I show you in 1 Kings chapter 9, it says that there were still some people living in the land who were not Israelites, including Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These were descendants of the nations who the people of Israel had not completely destroyed. They were commanded to utterly destroy these people during the campaign of Joshua. And they failed to get them all. And even David failed to get them all. So this is the time of Solomon. And it says, so Solomon conscripted them for his labor force. And they serve as a labor force to this day. And what's more is that's in 1 Kings chapter 9. 1 Kings chapter 10 says that the money that was being brought in to support the construction, they yearly received 666 talents of gold. That's 1 Kings chapter 10, 14. I'm like, what? Here's this. What? Here's this. The most holy temple, right? I mean, the Temple of Solomon, built by Nephilim with 666 talents of gold every year being brought in for it.
Right.
I'm going,
yeah,
what? Now all of a sudden it starts clicking in my head why. Okay, well that's why the Freemasons love this thing so much, because they're like all about the temple, right?
Right.
Their people built it. So I was like, well, what the heck made this thing holy then? And the only thing in my mind that made that thing holy was, at least at that time, Solomon, his heart was in the right place.
Yes.
Later he goes way off, but David wasn't allowed to build this thing, so it passed. This was his father's dream, Solomon's father David, and so he takes up the task to start doing it. And the people that he hires to do it is like very suspect, and the way that he did it's very suspect. But after he did it, he prays this beautiful prayer of dedication. And this is my paraphrase totally. I could be totally off, totally wrong, but this is my interpretation of it. Is that God looks at what Solomon had done in fulfillment of the promise for David, what he wanted to do, and I kind of see God going, okay, bro. All right, you did what your father wanted done. I appreciate it. Your prayer, that's pretty awesome. I'll tell you what, dude. If you walk in my ways and do my statutes, I will put my name on this thing that you've constructed. And that's the only thing in my mind that made it holy. Is Father said, I'm going to put my name on this thing, and I will bless you. And then there's the caveat. But if you don't walk in my ways, then I'm going to take my name off this thing, and all the consequences and all that's going to happen afterwards, which we certainly see takes place later. So to me, the building itself, there's nothing holy about that thing.
Right.
And if you keep reading on that blog, I talk about the 72 Goetic demons, the Lesser Key of Solomon, the Testament of Solomon, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, how that was all tied in, and how he had hired what was it, Hiram, to build the thing. It's like, jeez. So, I don't know. I mean, for me, that could be an argument that it was built something other than the dome tent. Considering the people who were involved. So right. I could honestly go either way with it. I'm waiting to hear what Andy comes up with.
Yeah, I would be interested to see what he says as well, because in examining, as far as the way that you have the outer, then the inner sanctum, and then you have the Holy of Holies, and also the way that Noah's Ark was built with these three different levels, and then the wilderness tabernacle in the same manner, it, in my opinion, represents what we see of the cosmology, with the first two heavens below the firmament, and then the third heaven being the place like the Holy of Holies, where the presence of the Most High God is, that sits above the vaulted dome of the earth. It seems to represent that cosmology in the way that God has established it. And so in the book that I wrote, Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, I speak about those divisions with each one of those structures, but it would be really interesting to see what Andy comes up with as far as, him being a structural engineer and all that with regard to Solomon's temple, because his reconstruction of the wilderness tabernacle, Moshe's wilderness tabernacle, and being dome shaped, it would make sense to me. But again, what really was it in representation of, and like you said, was it skewed in some manner because of the labor force and Even the demons involvement and the Nephilim, and I mean, it would be intriguing to see.
Well, yeah, and if Andy's model is correct, there are the other curtains on the inside for the Holy of Holies that had the cherubim on them, right? And so, obviously, if it's a circular dome tent, then the Holy of Holies is in the center of the highest part of the dome, right? So you have these really long, tubular curtains, creating like a tube within which the Holy of Holies would be, right? Which, visually speaking, that makes a lot more sense to me than the little compartment in the back of the rectangular box.
Right.
So I started thinking, well, geez, if that model's correct, and Moses, if that model's correct, then I believe Moses was, it says that he was shown things in the heavenlies that he was to emulate here on earth. So it's like whatever he saw, he was given a blueprint to emulate that. So if that's the case, then the circular dome tent that Andy designed would be the earthly representation of this thing that we're living in.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so then, geographically speaking, the curtains around the Holy of Holies could be the what we call the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. Is we get these wavy curtain looking, and I've seen those before. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but I
haven't.
It's a spectacular sight. It's actually kind of a funny story. I was working a job up at Fort Kent, Maine, way up in northern Maine, and between gigs we would go out canoeing, and there were lots of forking rivers that went all over the place. So we went out and we got lost. And we're in the middle of nowhere, northern Maine, woodland, and we had no idea where we were. And the water, it starts getting dark, and the water starts speeding up, and we start hearing,
oh no,
and we're like, and I mean, we're starting to speed up, and we're slamming into rocks and stuff, and like, this is not good, we don't know what's ahead, but and they're like caribou and bear and stuff on the land, so we're like, geez, and we're in the middle of nowhere. So we end up seeing a lone street light in the distance, and we're like, head for the light. So we headed for the light, and it was like a boat ramp. And so we pulled all our boats up there. Now, I was low man on the totem pole, right? So everybody else is like, okay, we're gonna go into town and see if we can get a ride back. You watch the gear, Skiba. I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting there by myself, and I had just seen a news report where I think it was Clinton had just signed a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, the Oslo Accords, I think it was, or something like that. And so, at that time, I was a pre-tribber and all this stuff. I'm like, oh, this is it, 7-year peace treaty, right? So I was a pre-tribber, convinced that I just saw the signing of the 7-year peace treaty on the news like a couple of days ago. And I'm sitting there by myself in the dark, and I'm looking up at the sky, and there's like a zillion stars, right? And all of a sudden, the sky rips open. It's like, it didn't make that sound, but in my head it did, Yeah. And all of a sudden, these like green and blue and magenta, like neon color looking wavy things like Venetian blinds start going, and I had never seen that before, and I didn't think you could see the northern lights that far south. I thought you had to be further north into Canada or whatever. So I'm seeing them now. I'm thinking that's the sky ripping open, right? This is the rapture. I swear to you, this is true. That was like, this is it, and while I'm having this rapturous moment, the guys that got a ride, and the truck pulls in behind me, and I didn't hear it because of the river. And when the lights of the truck pulled in, it illuminated there was a fog that had settled about 2 feet over the river in front of me. And when the lights hit it, it was like a perfect layer of cloud. And I thought,
I've been pulled out.
And I started stepping out like I'm going to step out on the cloud. I thought, I had this vision I was going to fly up like Superman, but maybe we ride up in a cloud. Okay, that's cool, right? So I'm totally in the moment. I'm stepping out on the cloud, right? Of course, hitting the water, And then I hear, Skiba, what the F and what the hell? What are you doing? Oh, nothing.
Oh man, that's funny.
It's one of these stories that sticks with you. But now I have that story in my head, and I remember it so vividly. And when I saw Andy's model and started thinking about the curtains like that, I'm going, wow. And then when you start talking about Mount Meru and the sides of the north, and all that stuff right there, I'm going, wow. Andy's model just makes so much sense, and I would encourage people to look into it. I do want to show something else here, though. How much time we have before the break? About 3 minutes.
Minute and 30.
Minute 30. Okay. Well, we have confirming witnesses. We've already showed you that rakia from raka, beaten down metal strips. That the Hebrew word signifies solid. The Hebrew scholars took their Hebrew text, translated it into Greek, got stereoma, which is even more adamant that we're talking about a solid structure. And then Jerome comes along later, and Latin comes up with firmamentum, from which we later get firmament. In every case, the word indicates something hard, solid structure. The word itself, the definitions of the words. But we have confirming witnesses to that in Job 37:18, and you can look in multiple translations.
Yes.
King Jimmy says, "Hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong as a molten looking glass?" Other ones say, spread out the skies hard as cast metal mirror. Bronze mirror, cast mirror, bronze. Multiple translations talking about a hard structure, reflective hard structure. And then another confirming witness in Proverbs 8:28, where it says, "When he made firm the skies above." This thing is firm. It's a hard structure with multiple confirming witnesses. And you were the one that, when I did this, I think one of our first interviews, that pointed out Amos 9:6. And maybe that's a good place to stop here before we go to break. But come back and talk about that, because I think Amos 9:6 is a huge deal and worth diving into.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And we'll pick it up right there when we return. And Bill, I'll answer your question on the other side of break. We'll be right back, everyone, for final segment.
The reviews for Extendivite are amazing. Here are some from Amazon. By Christine, great for heart palpitations. By Anne, before I started using this product, every afternoon my ankles and my hands would be swollen. That doesn't happen anymore. So if that part of their advertising is true, I have to assume that the rest of it is also. Not to mention that when I had my yearly blood test, only a few weeks after beginning to use this product, my cholesterol had dropped over 30 points. I'm going to continue to take it. By Croc, I love this product. It really works. By Brad, works great, thank you. Tell us your story. Get your Extendivite today. To order, call 1-877-928-8822. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
If you have hard water, the Lime Scale not only leaves white spots, it clogs pipes and breaks down appliances, costing you hundreds of dollars in energy and wear. Eliminate Lime Scale and other water issues like brown staining and bad odors with HydroCare water products, available from Wave Home Solutions. Wave's affordable water systems don't use salts or chemicals. You'll love the way your water tastes, smells, and looks. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Hi, I'm Sergeant Jim Ram, retired. In early 2012, I was facing a laundry list of chronic health conditions that my physician was telling me were incurable. I knew there had to be a better way, and I learned how I could reverse every one of my ailments with science-based, clinically verified medical nutrition. In just a few months, I was able to reverse high blood pressure, gastric reflux, sleep apnea, arthritis, degenerative disc disease, heart arrhythmia, AFib, and many more. And I've lost over 70 pounds and kept it off. Now I'm hosting a radio program that's dedicated to helping my listeners do the same. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, If you're sick of being used as an ATM by your doctor, then you'll want to tune into the Your DIY Health radio program here on Truth Frequency Radio every Thursday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern and 6 to 8 a.m. Pacific.
Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. Bill asks in the chat room, is the Book of Enoch the sealed up book for this generation, or is there another book of prophecy? Well, definitely the Book of Enoch, as it makes mention of in the first chapter, was wrote for a remote and distant generation, and I do believe that we are that generation, and that we're seeing the unfoldment of the Joel 2 and Acts, where God promised to pour out his spirit upon all flesh. That I believe a lot of the collections and a lot of the ancient manuscripts which have been lost and forbidden and forgotten are coming to light again, and a lot of that has to do with the access that we have through the internet and people posting, and a lot of these ancient manuscripts, digitized copies being rendered and made of these collections, which have been protected in large part by certain groups and certain monasteries, certain peoples, that there's ongoing efforts worldwide from different individuals to digitize and make digitized copies of a lot of these ancient texts. And in doing so, they are coming to the forefront and being made available to the public in a way that has never, previously that we've had that kind of access. And so I do absolutely believe that, a lot of knowledge is coming to light. And yes, the Book of Enoch is part of that fulfillment, but I believe that others are also part of that revelation, and that the book that we put together, the Great Commission 3 on the end time apocalypses, and most of those texts the public have never heard about, all of these apocalyptic texts that are specific to the end times, that that is part of that collection and that revealing. Rob, would you care to comment on that, and then we'll move into Amos 9:6?
Well, yeah, I'm a big. That's why we're doing the show. This is a lead into the Book of Enoch. So I'm
right.
It's going to take us a long time to get there, I think. But after we get through Genesis 6, we'll jump into the Book of Enoch. But yeah, right off the bat, the first chapter, the first verse, the first chapter of the Book of Enoch says this is not for this generation, but for a future generation who will live in the day of tribulation. And the timing, it's been around for a while, but then we find, I think there was 6 copies of the Book of Enoch in Cave 4 alone of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was a very popular text for that community. And I think I was actually thinking about this earlier today as we're going through the Book of Enoch. One of the things I'd like to do while we're doing it is to make correlations to the canonized text from verses that we read in Enoch, because I started doing that
Right.
a long time ago. Is as I was reading something in the book of Enoch, is that's this, or there's a parallel to that in this scripture right here from the canonized text, and just kind of go through that to show how clearly the authors of scripture were very much aware of and heavily influenced by that book, and I think we'd be foolish to write it off, in my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, especially when you consider that things like the biblical cosmology and the fact that Enoch spends 14 chapters in the book on the courses
Yeah.
of the heavenly luminaries describing the motions of the sun, the moon, the stars, the wandering stars, and there's not one passage or verse attributed to the motion of the earth, because there is no motion to the earth, is confirmation of exactly what the Bible reveals. There's 5 passages which specifically declare that the earth is fixed and motionless and stationary. And so, yeah, these kind of things. And as I show in my book, that when you really apply what Enoch describes as these motions, as you also brought it forth in the Stellarium, that, I believe Enoch was shown exactly what you were led to revelation on, using Stellarium, that he saw that exact motion of the sun, speeding up and slowing down as it moves back and forth between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, creating the seasons and the elongation of the day and the night, and then the shortening of them. That's exactly what Enoch describes, with the motions of the sun and the moon through the 6 gates of heaven, as I share in Decryption within that book. So yeah, I do absolutely look forward to getting into that. And but we'll go into Amos 9:6 now, because I think this passage also shows and affirms why it is that we should study all accounts when examining a particular passage or a particular verse. Because for those that are, the King James only crowd, in looking at this particular passage in Amos 9:6, you miss the context of what is captured in other translations. And specifically, I'll read the verse in the King James that says, "It is he that buildeth his stories in the heaven, and hath founded his troop in the earth. He that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." In the NASB, it translates it as this: "The one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens, and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth. He who calls for the waters of the sea, and pours them out on the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." Well, I spent an entire chapter on this particular verse in my 10th book, The Vaulted Dome, Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth. And this was a critical passage for me, because in examining and looking at, because you have to really tie it together in context to the verse that precedes it in order to really understand the fullness of why it is that I believe it should be translated vaulted dome over the earth rather than troop. And looking at those words and looking at the definitions for that word aguda, which is the one that is translated as vaulted dome, when you look at the independent definitions, the verses, the definitions are band, binding, cords, bands, thongs, metaphorical of slavery, a bunch of hyssop, a band of men, troops, and the vault of the heavens, the firmament, binding the earth to the heavens. And so, reconsidering that and really examining that, it's my opinion that that whole verse is describing again how it is that the heavens through the vaulted dome are bound to the earth, and that they form, what we see, again, even in the structure of the wilderness tabernacle, what Andy brought forth as this dome-like structure, that it's showing the unit, that, they dwell under the tent. He sitteth upon the circle of the earth, that the heavens spread out as a curtain above, they form together a tent. And so it's like the foundation of the earth, the heavens spread out above it, they form this dome-like tent, and they make a unit. And so, again, understanding it in that manner, it would make sense why this verse would be translated vaulted dome, and because it shows the symmetry of that particular unit and its connections to the heaven, the earth, and the heavens being bound together by the vaulted dome of the earth. And so I thought that was very interesting, and something that you and I, when we talked about it previously, it was a revelation to all of us.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it was huge. Because I grew up in a King James only environment. I myself am not King James only, but all my go-to verses, my memory verses and all that are in King James. So
right,
I was used to Troop, and as a result, that went completely over my head, just completely missed it. And you were the first that I heard talk about it. I'm like, what? So I went and looked, and right now I have up on the screen for people who are watching this on YouTube numerous English translations. You can go to BibleHub.com, Bible.cc, and just punch up Amos 9:6 and look at all the different English translations. And they're talking about that he's founded the heaven, the vault of heaven on the earth. He set the foundation of heaven on the earth. And what was intriguing to me is not only did numerous English translations say that, but Bible Hub has even other foreign languages on there. So you could look at Chinese and Russian and all kinds of different languages are on there. So what I did was I went through those different languages and copied and pasted them into Google Translate, which granted is not always 100% accurate, but it's still a reasonably good tool to at least take a look at. And when I did that, I mean, it was even more emphatic in some of the other languages, shockingly. So if you haven't done that, you might want to even check that out. Just like go to Bible.cc and look up that verse and look at the foreign languages, and then copy paste them in Amos 9:6 into Google Translate and see what you get. But when I understood that the word is a tightly knit unit, it's something bound together, I can understand why the King James translators, coming off of the Copernican revolution, by the way, may have looked at that and missed it because of, again, we all bring preconceived biases to the text, right? So, I mean, and I would say that probably extends even to translators. I mean, they're not perfect either. And, I'm sure these are godly men who took time to pray as they were doing the translations. I have no doubt of that. But when I looked at the word troop, I was in the Army, and I was in C Troop, 1st of the 110th Air Cav. Well, what was it? It's a troop is a tightly knit unit of men, a band of brothers, as they say, right? So, I understand that it's talking about knitting together. But what I was missing is that the context is here. He has built the upper chambers of heaven, and he's knit that to the earth. He's bound it to the earth. And the other English translators, and again the other foreign language translators, they got it. They understood it. And I was like, wow, that's just crazy right there, because then it starts to make sense where it talks about when it talks about the heavens shaking, the earth is shaking. When the earth is shaking, the heavens are shaking. Well, why? Because they're connected. That's why they're they're shaking. And then all of a sudden, I'll bring something else up here. Psalm 19. If you go to Psalm 19, this is a perfect correlation to what we're talking about, day 2 of creation, Genesis chapter 1. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. The firmament shows his handiwork. So when you just write the firmament off and say that it's just an expanse of air, gas, in the vacuum of space, you are the very thing that declares the handiwork of God, you are nullifying. You are turning it into nothing. This thing declares his glory and shows his handiwork. if you're just going to say it's nothing, it's air, gas, in the vacuum of space. Now, the counter argument with that would be, well, no, have you ever looked up in the sky? Look at the grandeur of the universe and the galaxies and the stars and all that, yeah, but it's the firmament that we're talking about here. So what you are imagining doesn't work, and that thing's connected to the earth. It's a physical hard structure. By confirming witnesses and by definitions of the words themselves, it is a firm hard structure. And Amos just told you that firm hard structure is connected to the earth. And then David comes along here and said, well, actually David probably precedes Amos, but anyway, all of the biblical authors are writing in the context of what has come before. So they don't contradict each other. They build upon what the other person said. Isaiah is one of the last guys, if not the last guy, to write about the cosmology. So anything that he's talking about, spread out the heavens like a tent and circle of the earth, he's writing in the context of what Solomon knew, what David knew, what Job knew, what Moses knew, what Amos knew, all these people. So day unto day, verse 2, Psalm 19, verse 2, day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle, an enclosed structure for the sun. He set a tabernacle, an enclosed structure for the sun. Again, another metaphor here, which is as, simile, a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, rejoicing as a strong man to run a race. So the sun's moving, not the earth. The sun, his going forth, is from the end of heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Question to those of you who don't believe what we're talking about here: how does this verse work? For you that believe in the Copernican model and the spinning heliocentric globular Earth model, how does that work for you? It doesn't. There's no way you can make that work. You'd have to put on one heck of a tap dancing mental gymnastic yoga trick to make that work. It's just not going to happen. And when it says that the circuit is from one end of the heaven to the other, well, the heaven's connected to the earth. Yes, with a dome, if it's a dome, then it presumably gets shallower as you get closer to the edges. So as that sun's moving out on its outer circuit, it literally is going to the ends of the heaven, and working its way back on a circuit. It's running a race. How can you make that fit if the sun is just in the a wing of the Milky Way galaxy in the backwater section of the universe? How is the sun going from one end of heaven to the other?
Exactly.
How does that work? It can't work.
Right, and then again, when we get to it on day 4, the sun wasn't even established and created or placed into the tabernacle of the firmament until the 4th day of creation. And the earth, for all those that believe in the whole planetary accretion model, which they say that the sun came to being first and then spinning in orbit all of these dust globs that came to form planets, and that these planets are still in orbit around the sun, that model doesn't work, because the earth was already here. And then the firmament fitted to the circle of the earth. That's where the sun and the luminaries and the moon were placed in tabernacle and hold their circuit, which is exactly what Enoch describes. Again, the motions are attributed to the moon, the sun, the luminaries, the wandering stars, and not to the earth. And you can't explain those things. Even like the story of the sun and the moon being stopped in Joshua's long day.
Right.
I mean, how do you get around that? Yeah. And then the sun going back 10 degrees in Isaiah.
Yeah.
It's not the earth that is being moved in order to shift the sun. It's the sun. And it clearly in the scriptures, it tells us, even the word shamash, which is, the word that in the Hebrew that comes for the sun, it describes rapidly moving. It's one of the definitions for it. And so it shows that even the word for it describes its motion. And so these are things that, because there are people even in the chat room now, they believe anything to do with, flat earth or biblical cosmology is just ludicrous, but you can't explain all of these things that we've just brought forth without examining with open mind those considerations. And it only makes sense when you understand it in the manner that we, hesitantly, very hesitantly, and unwillingly were brought to acceptance upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have another confirming witness in the book of Enoch, chapter 89, where there's a vision given of the coming flood. And it says, beginning in verse 2, "And again I raised mine eyes toward heaven and saw a lofty roof with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface, and I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness, the mist increased upon it. And as I looked at the height of that water had risen above the height of that enclosure and was streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water." I mean, you want to talk about a slant? When I read this, I was like, "What?" Enoch is a slam dunk for the circular enclosed world biblical cosmology, model. I mean, how can you look at that and not see, and I would parallel that with Genesis chapter 7. It says, "And the windows of heaven were opened."
Right.
Well, windows are something set in solid structures.
Yes,
walls.
exactly.
So how in the world do you, I've got a picture up on the screen right now, which one makes more sense, right? The spinning ball, where's the windows? Where's the enclosure, right? That these texts are talking about. I mean, it doesn't work.
Right. I'll read that verse that I read, just a portion of it earlier from the Pirkei Rabbi Eleazar, where it says, "The dome or inside shape of the heavens ascends upwards like a tub, that is to say, like a tent, which is spread out with its extremities fixed downwards, and its dome stretching upwards so that people can sit beneath it and their feet stand on the earth, whilst all of them are inside the tent. And likewise are the heavens. Their extremities are fixed downwards, and their dome stretches upwards, and all creatures dwell beneath them as in a tent, as it is said, and he spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in." Man. And so, I mean, when you find these examples, even Flavius Josephus, all of what we talked about, with regards to the second day of creation, the rakia, the firmament, stereoma. I mean, again, you cannot deny these things. And then once we get to day 4, the luminaries being established and given circuit and established in the tabernacle of the firmament, it's, in my opinion, undeniable.
Absolutely, and I know we're going to run out of time pretty quick here, so I'm going to sum up, my take on it with the PowerPoint slide from my presentation, where for me the firmament is truly the key to this whole thing. If you want to figure out what creation is all about, you got to do an in-depth study of the firmament. It's what seals the deal in more ways than one, pardon the pun, right? Unquestionably, the thing is hard. Job 37:18, firm. Proverbs 8:28, supporting the waters above, Genesis 1:6-8, and Psalm 148:4. It's attached to the earth, Amos 9:6, within which Yahuwah placed the sun, moon, and stars, Genesis 1:14-19, and Psalm 19:1-6, and upon which his throne sits, Ezekiel 1:26, Isaiah 66:1. Clearly, this is a very important issue to Yahuwah, Psalm 19:1. The only model that accommodates every aspect of the firmament is the circular enclosed world model. The only way around this is to grossly misrepresent the scriptures, yanking the true meaning of the words used out of context and fantasizing about definitions for those words, which are not even remotely supported by the text or the historical context in which the scriptures were written. The firmament, man, guys, if you want to understand cosmology, you got to spend some time looking at the firmament. If you're going to call yourself a Bible scholar, start there. In my opinion.
And if you're going to really believe the Word of God, then take some time to look up the original context of the words that are found in these passages and to get a conceptualization of what the ancient Hebrews believed themselves. And, again, undeniable. And we were hesitant, unwilling for a very long time when first confronted and asked to do this research. And I know a lot of the people out there that are still unsure are as well. But very well said, brother. I think you summed it up in great manner. 2 minutes, so final comment?
Yeah, I just... it took an entire day for God to do the firmament. When I was thinking about life, as we get to the later days of creation, when he starts creating animals and birds and fish and eventually humans, he in some of these cases he took entire days to make these life forms. And it doesn't take much research to look at the vast diversity of all life, whether we're talking plant life, birds, fish, land animals, even the diversity in people, right? Like, there's tremendous detail in the creation of life, and some of those creations took an entire day. Well, put that into perspective. It took the entire day for God to create the firmament.
Yes.
Like, this is a serious deal.
Right.
And when I start looking at the historical record, after Admiral Byrd, went down there for Operation High Jump and Deep Freeze, and then immediately the United States and Russia start launching high-altitude nuclear bombs into the sky, and we called our side of it Project Fishbowl, which is part of Operation Dominic, and Pastor Cressman out in Lubbock said, yeah, look up the name Dominic, and when we looked up the name Dominic, and it's a Latin name that means of the Lord. So, like, we literally called our mission the Fishbowl of the Lord, and we're launching high-altitude nukes into the sky after the Admiral Byrd, expedition down there for Operation Deep Freeze, which brought about the Antarctic Treaty and all kinds of other things. And then, very shortly thereafter, we've got NASA, DARPA created at the same time NASA was. Crazy.
Yes. We'll go into it more. I'll be on Rob's show next week, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and please keep an open mind. God bless all of you. Shalom. Good night, brother.
Good night, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Be blessed all.